What if I told you there's a simple, literally 120-second psychological framework that can absolutely destroy procrastination before it even gets a chance to start? Sounds pretty crazy, right? But today, we're tackling a universal struggle. We're diving into this fascinating piece of brain science that is going to completely rewire how you approach your to-do list. Let's jump right in.
So I want you to really think about this feeling for a second. Because, let's be honest, you know exactly what it's like. You're scrolling on your phone for 3 solid hours, and it feels completely effortless. The time just totally vanishes. But then, the mere thought of opening a blank document to start a work project, man, that can feel physically painful, almost like you're trying to walk through waist-deep mud. Why is that? Well, it's actually because our brains are fundamentally hardwired to seek out immediate rewards. The scrolling, it gives you this constant, low-effort drip of dopamine, but the work project offers nothing up front except immediate heavy friction.
Okay, let's dive into this, because understanding this definition is an absolute game changer. For basically our whole lives, we've been conditioned to believe that procrastination is some sort of character flaw. We think it's laziness. But actually, scratch that, it's not. Procrastination is really a biological emotion regulation issue. You see, you aren't avoiding the work because you're lazy, you're avoiding the negative emotions associated with the work. You are just subconsciously trying to regulate your mood.
To truly understand that emotion regulation piece, we have to look at the brain's hardware, specifically the amygdala, which is essentially your brain's fear center. When you look at a huge, looming task on your calendar, let's say an 8-page report or a massive, complicated tax return, your amygdala literally views it as a physical threat. No joke, it scans that task, foresees all this intense effort, stress, and potential failure, and it just sounds the alarm. It starts treating your work project like a predator out in the wild. And when that threat response fires off, your brain frantically starts looking for an escape route. It wants to make you feel safe and productive again. So it misdirects you toward low-friction tasks. Suddenly, you're checking your email for the 5th time. Or you randomly decide you desperately need to clean your desk. Or you go straight down a rabbit hole of videos. The real problem here isn't your inability to do the actual work. Once you're working, you're usually fine. The problem is the intense, terrifying friction of just starting.
So how in the world do we hack that threat response? Well, enter the 2-minute rule. Originally popularized by productivity expert David Allen and then brilliantly refined by habits expert James Clear, this rule is the ultimate behavioral hack. It is designed specifically to slip right past your amygdala's radar.
The 2-minute rule works in 2 distinct, highly effective ways. Step 1 is all about instant execution. If it takes less than 2 minutes, just do it immediately. Step 2 is about your larger ambitions. If it's a major goal, scale it down until the action takes just 2 minutes. It's a completely foolproof way to bypass that brain threat response we just talked about, simply because 2 minutes of effort doesn't trigger fear.
So the crucial point is, for these minor tasks, executing them immediately actually requires less mental energy than scheduling them. Think about it. Answering a super quick yes or no email, putting your coffee mug in the dishwasher, filing a single document. If you put that stuff on a to-do list, your brain has to remember it, categorize it, and worry about it later. Doing it instantly frees up your cognitive bandwidth and builds immediate momentum.
Now, while doing quick chores is great, the real magic happens when we apply this framework to our massive, intimidating goals. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this is exactly where we learn how to trick the brain into starting the things that actually move the needle in our lives by scaling them down drastically.
Just take a look at this. Read a book tonight. Wow, that is a heavy, time-consuming task. Your brain hates it. But what about read just 1 page? Do you see how the friction just vanishes? Reading 1 page takes less than 2 minutes. It requires almost zero effort. The threat response stays completely dormant.
Let's look at another one. Run 5 miles. Oof! Your amygdala is already screaming at you about the sweat, the heavy breathing, the chunk of time it's going to take. But contrast that with simply tying your running shoes and stepping outside. That's it. That is your only goal. Anyone can tie their shoes and step onto the porch. It is a completely achievable, zero-friction task. And here's a classic one. Study for finals. Overwhelming, right? Incredibly stressful. But reducing it down to open your notebook and write 1 line, suddenly the action feels entirely effortless. You've essentially scaled a giant mountain down to a tiny, easy-to-step-over pebble.
This brings us to a foundational realization that basically flips everything we've ever been taught completely upside down. We constantly sit around waiting for motivation to strike us before taking action. We think, oh, I'll do it when I feel like it. But human psychology actually works in reverse. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. Taking action, even if it's literally just 2 tiny minutes of it, is actually what creates the motivation to continue.
And the reason this 120-second framework is so remarkably effective isn't just about behavioral psychology. It actually mirrors the fundamental laws of physics. Let's shift gears for a second and look at the actual science of productivity here, because it explains perfectly why tying your shoes ultimately leads to a 5-mile run.
Newton's first law of motion states that an object at rest tends to stay at rest, but an object in motion stays in motion. And this brilliantly illustrates how human momentum works. It doesn't just apply to apples falling from trees or cars driving down a highway. It applies directly to your psychology. When you're sitting on the couch, your resting state wants to remain at rest. But once you generate even a tiny bit of motion, like opening that notebook or tying that shoe, you become an object in motion, and you naturally want to stay in motion.
This is what we call overcoming the friction threshold. The hardest part of any task is always the first 120 seconds, every single time. But once you break past that initial 2 minutes of friction, a shift actually happens in your brain. You've safely bypassed the amygdala's alarm system, and your mind naturally transitions into a state of flow. You're no longer fighting to start, you're just doing.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that number right there, 80%. Statistically speaking, 80% of the time, once you sit down and read that first page, you will just keep reading. Once you step outside in your running shoes, you'll probably go for a walk or even that run. The 2 minutes was just a Trojan horse. It was a clever way to get you past your own biological defenses.
Ultimately, the core philosophy of everything we've covered today boils down to one simple truth. The ultimate goal isn't to trick yourself into doing just 1 minute of work. The goal is to consistently master the art of showing up. A habit absolutely must be established before it can be improved. By mastering the first 2 minutes, you master the art of starting.
So, I want to leave you with a direct challenge. What task have you been avoiding all week long? Pick that one specific task. Don't look at the whole mountain. Scale it down to a 2-minute starter habit. Just a tiny, completely effortless action, and I challenge you to go do it right now. If you found the insights in this explainer valuable, make sure to hit subscribe. And I'd love it if you dropped a comment below telling me exactly what task you're scaling down and tackling today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and stay focused.